Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torres, joined by my co-host, Efrain Rosario. Hello, Efrain.
Hi, Daniel.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Going through the coldest days of the year here in Barcelona.
It's certainly not my favorite time of year weather-wise. That's for sure.
No, in general, actually, post-Christmas, you don't have as much money as you did at the end of the year. You meant to save and you meant to not do much and do a lot of work, right? Which is all a lot of fun, but maybe it's not as good as summertime or Christmas time, for instance.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it is in essence like for a lot of people, kind of just a natural break and a new beginning.
That's
right.
True.
So
That's true.
kind of a fresh start, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. So to make our listeners' life happier, we actually have an old acquaintance of yours today on the show.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm excited that Scott Boyle has graciously joined us for a conversation. So Scott and I worked together for a while at Diageo, and I'm really excited to hear him tell us a little bit about his new role as Senior VP of Analytics and Insights at Danone, to hear what he's been up to since we last worked together.
Perfect. And what do you expect to learn about today from this conversation?
Well, I always learn something from every time I talk to Scott. So I don't think that today will be any different. And it will not only benefit us, but obviously our listeners as well, especially in the topic of all things data, both in terms of how you procure it, but also in terms of like what's the most effective way to use it as a source of competitive advantage. Really exciting to reconnect and just to hear what you've been up to these past few months at Danone. If you can tell our listeners a little bit about your current role.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So we've historically had kind of two arms of super experts. We've had a almost team of PhDs of consumer researchers that know how to get underneath the skin of every single want, desire, need, affiliation related to our treasure chest of brands. And separately, we had really hardcore data experts that were able to create different products internally, as well as continually keep the finger on the pulse of what's happening in the marketplace and where are the opportunities for us to move forward. And we're going through a bit of a transformation. So in order to make those more essential business partners or even business leaders within the organization, we've brought those two things together, which to me has always made sense to have the quant and qual as kind of the two sides of the same coin, to make sure that this team is working as one voice to have one version of the truth, as well as pushing that critical path throughout the end-to-end planning cycle at Danone that's also nascent and something we're building out at the moment. So very similar to what we worked on together at Diageo.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, I think it just makes intuitive sense, right? Which is the qual and the quant sides of the equation tend to just complement each other. And in essence, to kind of tell that whole story, you need both sides of the coin to really kind of bring some insights to life, to be honest.
For sure. And look, we're trying, all of this is through the lens of becoming a truly consumer and customer-backed organization. And I think when you look across the landscape, you tend to have one or two as a core competency. And we're really trying to kind of pull the Band-Aid off and work backwards from how is every single thing we're doing going to deliver value to our customers and our shoppers. But at the same time, all of that has to be anchored in what are the needs, occasions, demand spaces that are required to win, to grow the categories that we play in.
Mm-hmm. And I know that during your career, if I look at your profile on LinkedIn, for example, I see that a lot of the work that you've done in the last few years before you joined Danone a few months back was around net revenue management. How does your background, how did it sum up to the current role that you're doing now at Danone around analytics and insights?
Yeah, it's really funny. So if you look far enough back, I'm getting a little old, so you have to scroll a bit. But I used to be an accountant. So I was a certified accountant coming out of school, worked in the shared service center at Kimberly-Clark and kind of learned the way that managerial information is created and how that process works and the way to harness it to make better decisions as an organization. Then went into more of the world of costing. So got to lead a team of super talented analysts that supported the tissue manufacturing across the US at Kimberly-Clark. That manifested in literally living on converting assets or tissue assets in different random cities in America. So Mobile, Alabama, or Marinette, Wisconsin.
Wow.
And all of that was the first foray into how many different types of data can you consume to figure out what's possible and build roadmaps towards how to get there. So whether it's OEE, it's throughput, it's costing, all of that stuff, there's consistent themes as we go through. Then had the opportunity to go over to the UK when I was pretty junior in my career to work in, I guess it would be a strategy function. So I worked for the CFO, and the task then was, were we set up to be a cash positive and profit driving business unit? And that involves some divestment, that involves some relaunching of different product portfolios. And I found myself in Italy and Spain relaunching Scottex with the team and trying to figure out things like strategic pricing and pack price architecture and thinking, wow, this is amazing. What is this called? And learned that it's called revenue management. So after spending a bit more time in some customer facing roles at Kimberly-Clark, then took the opportunity to kind of go to boot camp and learn it properly at PepsiCo. So got to really kind of appreciate their super rigorous, super deep approach to how you not only harness these capabilities, but turn them into an operating model of how you kind of optimize day to day. And was also lucky to be working in the joint venture between PepsiCo and Unilever. So the Unilever board got very excited about what we were doing in the Lipton space. And they hired over my boss, who then brought me along with him to help set up the first generation of revenue management at Unilever. Had an absolute blast, got to work across Asia, India, and Europe. And the travel just got to be too much because I was recently married, and my wife was kind enough to take a break in her career to move to Amsterdam with me, and got a great job. She was working at Adidas. But I was just gone. I was living out of a suitcase. So when Diageo had called and kind of said, hey, we're trying to do the same thing here, we have an in-market opportunity. Again, came in to the Northern Europe business unit where Efrain is sitting today in Amsterdam. And whether we call it revenue management, category management, insights and analytics, it's basically the same thing. So it's, what are all the different data points available to you? What are the decisions you can actually make? And how can you make sure that you're tying together the right pieces of data and consumer research to be able to make the right decisions at the right time in a way that's going to grow the categories that we play in, as well as give incentives to our customers and have sustainable growth for the long term. Shortly after that, in Northern Europe, ended up setting it up globally at Diageo. So was able to set up a team of super geniuses, including people like Matali and Baz, Efrain, who you get to see all the time. And we had the luxury of being able to travel around the world and not just teach this as a capability, but really turn it into deep dives of, here is the rigorous process framework of what we need to do, and deploying it with the team shoulder to shoulder for, let's say, 12, 13 weeks at a time, all in the end having commercial plans as an output that we could go and bring to life and commercialize with our trading partners.
Was that received with a certain degree of skepticism at first? You know, that crossroads of data, analytics, and the commercial function? Because you put it very well. You said that ultimately they're the same thing, but I know that wasn't necessarily like that at the time.
So look, I think it's more about the way that you can bring it to life for people than it is around the subject matter itself. So you'll hear a consistent theme in all these things as we talk today. To me, data fluency and how you're able to leverage data really comes down to how well can you do a persuasive sell and select data points that are going to help you drive difference in the business. And some of those data points are qualitative, and they're things you get when you sit down with stakeholders and interview them. And it's just almost, tell me what your dream is, and I'm going to help you bring that to life. So the more we can get down that space, rather than people getting concerned with roles and responsibilities and who owns what, that seems to be the best recipe for success.
Yeah. And to that point, Scott, given, like you said, well, first off, when we do scroll your LinkedIn profile, we in essence see an all-star lineup of, iconic brands that you've had the opportunity to work for over your career. How has that culture, that mindset of data fluency varied across these large organizations? Like, what have been your observations in regards to, like, the different levels of fluency, or also, like, to Daniel's point, in essence, openness to adopting that kind of mindset as well?
Yeah, it's funny. So thanks for having a look, because I have been incredibly lucky to work at some blue chip companies that I would highly recommend to anyone, any of them on the list. So you've got almost two camps. It's like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? So the more rigorous kind of process forward, this is a machine, this is the way to learn how a business works, that was very consistent at Kimberly-Clark and at PepsiCo. They both kind of skew towards, there is a way that we operate, and there's a way that we understand moms, or we understand our consumers, and really figuring out how to build those propositions that are going to last and matter. That's kind of the one end of the prism. On the opposite side, you've got the Diageos, the Unilevers, and the Danone that are really probably more entrepreneurial and a little bit more of the, hey, I bought into this purpose and what it is we're trying to do, and I'm here and I'm going to figure it out, right? So there's always been a nice space to try to land a little bit of the process stuff. I think Diageo is still on a journey. We're definitely on a journey here. Unilever is definitely the gold star. I think they've got the right balance between the two. But all of them, I think the consistent theme is super talented people who really believe in what it is we're trying to achieve and what it is they can do when they show up every day in order to make a difference.
And curious to know that you talk about people as a headhunter, these type of people that can understand both data science and its business impact. How do you find them internally, externally?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. And it's funny, I probably have a slightly different approach on some of this stuff, because you can teach someone how to get better at using data. What you can't teach is intellectual curiosity, or the ability to kind of get to root causes and figure out, well, what do I need to know to make the best decision? So the more that we're able to really distill from people running these FMCGs, oversimplifying, there's probably 7 or 8 things you can actually do in a plan. The problem is there's just a million different iterations of those things. So trying to get people with experiences, whether it's in data and analytics, category management, customer facing, brand management, whatever it is, people who really understand what it takes to run a business and the acumen, and being able to structure thoughts, identify problems, and figure out what data is required in order to go after those things. That seems to be the recipe. You probably need to have been in Excel before, right? There's some Basecamp stuff, but I'm not looking for people who can do multiple regressions on day one who've never actually sat and talked to a customer before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I imagine, you haven't referred to it using this term yet, but obviously it's a big buzzword, which is big data. What do you see as the big challenges around, quote unquote, big data, or however you choose to refer to, in essence, that space or that field where the people that you're referring to would play in an organization like a Danone or a Diageo?
So, not to be salacious, but I tend to find more issues with the concept of big data than I do strengths, because it always comes back to accountability and ownership. So there's a world where you see these as products that people own and process, and they tend to get partnered with some sort of tech platform that you get sold the, hey, here's some dashboards. They're going to teach you how to run your business. And all of a sudden people are saying, well, my data's clean, my job's done here, rather than actually saying, can we get back to the basics? Ever since early 90s, running these businesses have been more or less the same. We just have more enablers now. And being able to say, so what are the decisions I can actually make? If I make these decisions, can I leverage any of this big data to help me on my assumptions on what I expect is going to happen? Then did I execute it? Did I execute it properly? And where was I wrong in my assumptions based off of whether it worked or whether it didn't, and getting under the skin of all of that. So that could be a brand launch, that could be above the line comms, that could be a display at a single mom and pop shop in a corner store. Yeah, so getting back to basics, Ephraim. I think you've heard me say that before.
No, absolutely. And I feel like I think oftentimes we tend to add complexity where it's not needed, whereas we should really be striving for simplicity. And like you said, it's getting back to those basics. I had a boss at one time who used to preach to us, saying it's like, do what you're trying to do, but do it like in 25% of the words or 25% of the slides. If you count, if you measured your worth based on PowerPoint slides, it's like, we're not here to write 150 slide decks. We're really here to, in essence, like you said, communicate the story and drive some sort of impact. And simplicity is a beautiful thing when it comes to that kind of stuff.
100%. And look, I think when we haven't had the capability build with we all know how much more data is being created today than even 2 years ago, and how that kind of exponential curve's been going. Without being able to keep those kind of simple decision-making models in place while we're trying to consume all this data, the risk is you turn into a narrative culture. So all of a sudden it's like, well, hold on, my data tells me this, and that supports the thing that I'm trying to get done, rather than having kind of one ecosystem in the business of what the version of truth is. And that's celebrating the success and the failure, okay? Because you only learn if you continually improve on the things that you're doing, even if they are successful. And being able to just have kind of those standards, those frameworks. And my team makes fun of me all the time because I say codify in almost every single meeting, but it's like, this is how we operate. Getting down to those things, to me, is probably the right place for us to be right now. I'm not saying we'll never move to the place of big data, but we kind of need to learn the long division before we get the graphing calculator, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, for me, I'm not a data guy at all. If there was one subject I wasn't good at school was maths. So that's just an example. But when I look at the numbers of like how much data is created now, as you were saying, compared to before, but before is like just 2 years ago, right? Like the sheer amount of data created now is much bigger. But also before you said like it's about finding those basic data points that will make the difference. How do you manage that? Because ultimately it's up to you, right?
Yeah, for sure. Again, it always comes back to what decision can you make, right? And that you can call that a planning process. You can call that an operating model. At the end of the day, that all these people that sit in CPG, FMCG, that's what they do every day, is figuring out it's the basics of scientific method. So can you run an experiment on the different scenarios that can take place if you change your decision? And just building a culture around, well, how do we do that here? Like, we're on a journey of creating the Danone way of doing all these things, whether that's looking at the demand space architecture across the business and what are the price tiers, and figuring out, hey, where is the most interesting place for us to go and play? Things around brand affiliation and understanding kind of, hey, I say that I want to mean X. My consumer is telling me I mean Y. How do I go on a journey to move closer to my desired outcome? And it's boring, and it is PowerPoint templates a lot of the time, but it's basically saying, here's how we do this here. And at least let's standardize and stabilize our starting point, our base camp, for us to continuously improve and integrate more data points and everything going forward. But the basics kind of need to be built into how we operate as a team.
Yeah, it's the old adage, right? You crawl before you walk or run. I think oftentimes people try to fly before they can even get to the crawl or walk stage when it comes to some of the data and analytics topics.
100%.
Yeah. So I'm curious to, and alluding to what we talked about before, which is that, again, you've had the great opportunity to work with a lot of iconic brands and blue chip companies in the FMCG space. What have you seen? And what prompted this was you mentioned that you are in the process of developing the Danone way of a lot of these things, revenue growth management, shopper analytics, whatever it may be, which sounds very similar to some of the work that we've worked on, at places like Diageo, but also I'm sure that, the same thing is happening at PepsiCo and has happened at Unilever and a couple other places as well. What have you seen as some of the similarities and differences in terms of, how that work is approached at the different companies?
So look, I think the luxury of the environment I've come into is it isn't that we don't have the capability, right? It's just when we go and do something on yogurt and the next week we go and do something on plant-based beverages, it might end up being completely different frameworks, different data from different vendors, all of that. So I'm in a very privileged spot to be able to say, well, hey, let's just put these side by side and pick the best stuff. But the themes are there. So it really comes down to, is there a ribbon that you can pull all the way through the organization? So most recently, where Efrain and I were lucky to work together at Diageo, we were trying to set up what the Diageo way of end-to-end planning was, and how everything from thinking about category growth down to what stores we call on and what the minimum product assortment was needs to have one connected process end-to-end. And that's very similar to what we're doing now. When we were talking about PepsiCo, I think they've been on that journey a bit longer. So they've got that hardcore funnel of the way decisions are made and how they flow through. And I put Unilever closer to that destination as well. But it really always comes down to, can you capture the perspective of your consumer, your shopper, the customer who owns the point of sale, and what's actually best for the category all in one process? And making sure we don't wait until it's time to sell to start thinking about the customer, or we don't wait until we want to write an advertisement to think about the consumer and what needs to happen in the supply chain in order to get there. So it's really all how to cross-functional ways of working, and more so not who does what, but how are we going to come together and make one decision that's going to have the biggest benefit across all the organization is probably the biggest theme that I see in it. There's massive unlocks. Like we've seen it happen time and time again, whether it's at Diageo or a lot of the incredible work that happens at PepsiCo and Unilever. So.
Very interesting. I don't know if this is self-explanatory. Well, if you've already explained that, but that's something that before the call, this conversation, I was curious about, which is like, and again, from my point of ignorance about data, which is why is data important as a competitive advantage for big consumer goods companies? Like, why even bother and not go with traditional methods of marketing, sales, and so on?
Yeah, no. So I would go as far as to say, Daniel, that having data isn't a competitive advantage. It's how you use it, right? So every single day, whether it's in your personal life or it's at work, you're making thousands of decisions. And on the things that really matter, so if you want to go buy a house, you're probably going to want to make sure you understand some data around, well, how much do these houses cost? How much upkeep is there? What's my tax situation? All these things, and making sure that you've got the right inputs to make sure that you and your family are making the best decision for you. It's the same in an organization, right? So what is the right promo calendar? Am I having the right shopper activity in order to incentivize shoppers the right way? Have I figured out strategic pricing and what I want my brand to mean? All these things require data. And the funny thing is if you just have IRI or Nielsen, you're already probably good enough before you start investing in more stuff to get some of the basics in place. Then you layer in equity, you layer in different consumer panel and shopper panel stuff, and just the more robust you can make the frame through which you make decisions is where the value comes from.
Got it.
Yeah.
And what does it, and ultimately, I guess the outcome is just like being able to read certain situations better and taking better decisions than your competitors, no?
For sure. It's strategy into action, right, is kind of the first one. So what decisions can I make? What do I need to know? Then the second bucket is probably, if I make this decision, what do I think is going to happen? And where you really see the continuous improvement and optimization is being able to say, so what actually happens, not only for me, but the entire marketplace, and being able to work backwards and diagnose the actual choices that not only we took, but everyone in the marketplace in order to lead to those outcomes. And if you can get those three big buckets together, you're in a pretty good place.
How do you see that part of that measurement that's not strictly commercial?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Daniel. So one of the biggest reasons I came to Danone is how core that is, the culture and purpose. And it's not just lip service. It's something that comes to life every day in how we operate. And so I sit in the strategy function. Within our strategy function, we have a mission and sustainability team that lives and breathes that every single day. So making sure that we're continuously focused on the dual purpose, which is something good for society and the earth, as well as something that by growing, we're going to be able to give better, good food to more people around the world. It's definitely more challenging to measure some of these things, but that's why we have super geniuses in that space that are looking after it. And that can be agriculture metrics, that can be CO2, that can be nutrition, that can be all sorts of things. And again, I talked a lot about the triple win earlier without naming it. So thinking about the consumer, the category, and our business, we almost have a quadruple win where we're also thinking about the planet and nutrition. And every single step within our end-to-end planning, it's almost how do we bring the voice of what the right thing to do is for the most people as we're going through those different decisions. So it's been fascinating, and it's definitely a very, very special element of the culture here that inspires everyone when they show up to work every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine, like you said, it's not just lip service, but I imagine part of that is also the fact that is the visibility, of those metrics and those measures at all levels of the organization. Is that something that you see, that you've been able to see thus far at Danone,
Yeah.
which is that, that's something that gets communicated at all levels of the organization?
For sure. So almost every single one of our town halls with our local CEO, he's got kind of our business path on a page, which has equal parts about growth and what we want to mean with our brands, but also having a laser focus on the whole One Planet, One Health agenda. And what does it take for us to actually be a leader in this space? I mean, we're the world's largest B Corp. That means something. It isn't something that you just achieve. It means it's a role that you play in society and in the economy. So
yeah,
well,
and to your point, as the world's largest B Corp, I know there's a lot of other companies, some of the companies that our listeners work for, who in essence look up to Danone in terms of leading the conversation in this space. So with that in mind, what other analytical areas or topics are you excited about in terms of exploring in the coming years?
Yeah, so this will resonate with you, Efrain, because it's something we've talked a lot about in the past, but making sure that our top-to-top communications with our customers are holistic and thoughtful. And what do I mean by that? So it's one thing to say, hey, I'd really like you, Mr. or Ms. Customer, to sell more of my stuff. That's generally what you think about when you talk to customers, right? But at the end of the day, we're in a place where we probably understand more about the consumers and what they want and need, and they understand their shoppers the best. So how can you bring that mold together? And the most exciting thing is, I think, from a consumer, a shopper, and a customer level, mission and sustainability is a super, super important element of how everyone's making decisions today. So not only talking about it in terms of what we mean as Danone, but also saying, here are the things that we think we can partner on together and why it's going to be good for you, good for society, and good for us, and making sure that we've got holistic views on all those things. So we're making some inroads today on stepping up that process. Let's see. It should be fun.
No, I'm sure, and ultimately, I think it will also make your job more interesting, no? Because you're seeing, like, you know, per se, a company has to make money, of course, but it's also very cool that you can link your activity to, like, the greater mission of it, no?
For sure. And look, there's a lot of, I mean, I've been lucky to work with customers on every continent in most of the categories in the grocery store, and they're all doing exciting things to try to innovate in the space of how can you deliver better value and a better impact. So it's pushing on an open door, but it's just making sure we get all of our data, all of our insights, and all of our process in line in order to enable that.
Which is up to you.
Let's see. Luckily, I have a pretty great team around me.
So. Yeah. No, you referred to that a few times, which is obviously a good thing. And if we go back to the beginning of your career, which we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, and you were to give career advice to your younger self when you were a junior accountant back in the day, what type of advice would you give your younger self at the beginning of your career, knowing what you know now?
Don't worry about trying to color in the lines. Just be hungry to learn and how you can influence the business in a bigger way.
This was Scott Boyle from Danone. What did you learn today, Efrain? What are your takeaways?
As I expected, Scott delivered in terms of teaching me something, as he always does. I really liked how Scott laid out his thinking on data fluency, and given that he's had this full wealth of experience across, in essence, an all-star lineup of FMCG brands, he was able to kind of, in essence, articulate for us that there is a process and a purpose element to data fluency, and how certain companies will tend to lean into one or the other in terms of like their areas of strength. But obviously, since he's had the opportunity to work at all these places, he can kind of, in essence, bring the two of those things together to really drive data fluency now in his new job at Danone.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was interesting about, like, the fact that he said it's not about the quantity of data that you have, because that's relatively common these days, I guess, but it's about how you use it, no? And that it's ultimately built on a foundation of very smart people, which I think go hand in hand, no?
Well, it's the human element, right? So I think data can seem very cold and impersonal, but like you said, it's about how you use it, and the people, the super smart people that you have to make that happen is critically important. And I really liked his comment around, that he as a leader, he can teach someone data analytics, but he can't teach someone intellectual curiosity, right? So I think the fact that in terms of talent, you're looking for those individuals who are just intellectually curious to want to learn more in terms of, not just what the data is or, where you source it from, but how you use it and how you apply it in business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, this is a space where we'll see a lot of change, no? But I think that Scott, for me, came across as someone who knows, it felt like he knew what he's doing, no? That he's somebody that will come in and make a big difference at Danone in helping them understand how to make the most of data and apply it on to commercial activities as well, no? Which he was very consistent about.
And I think it's also about, that and I'm a big believer in this as well, which is that simplicity is a beautiful thing, right? So I think that, for something like data that can get very complex very fast, looking for that simplicity in regards to how you synthesize it and how you analyze it to drive insights and implications is really, really important. And, particularly in a space like sustainability and measuring sustainability specifically, which is obviously an area that Danone is a world leader in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it goes again to the link of data with like the greater mission of the company, right? I think that there's a good link there.
Yeah, he talked about the quadruple win, right? Which is the customer, the category, the consumer, and the planet, right? And the fact that that's something that's consistent in how they operate at Danone in terms of measuring the value that they bring, not just to the company, but to all those players and stakeholders as well.
Yeah. I think it's a very good North Star for people to follow. So I hope that our listeners too had the opportunity to learn about the world of data, but in a very commercial way, as I think, well, you know a lot about it already, Efrain, but I definitely feel like I know a lot more than I did.
Well, we can all learn,
exactly.
especially with somebody like Scott. So yeah, really grateful for his time.
Exactly. Well, thanks to all our listeners as well for joining us today again. Remember to follow us on LinkedIn if you're not doing it yet. We have a new video series with Raphael Schwartz where he talks about the world of digital marketing and social commerce, which I'm sure you'll find very interesting. It's also on our YouTube channel. And of course, a shout out to our friends, the CPG guys, who are creating very similar content to us, everything omni-channel, but for the US market. So we invite you to follow them as well. And we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG guys.